welcome, and this is the Science of Person-Centered Planning. We're going to get a little bit nerdy today, so hopefully you all are prepared. Is there anybody that is really a beginner level as far as person-centered planning and needs kind of a overview of what exactly we're talking about? Okay, perfect. Because this is hopefully for people that have been doing this for a while and they're really passionate about person-centered planning. So, all right, let me get my clicker here. So, debate has emerged starting in the 21st century about whether or not person-centered planning is evidence-based. And there have been attempts to make it evidence-based, but it's been hampered by the inability to kind of produce that reliable and consistent implementation, because it's a really individual and unique process, right? So it's really hard to kind of compare apples to apples in a scientific way to make sure that person-centered planning is really effective in doing what it's supposed to do in that really hard sciencey way, right? But the idea of person-centered planning is to really bring people together that partner with the person. My friend Sarah was talking about circles of support, which is a great way to make sure to plan a person's quality of life. Our keynote speaker was talking about how important it is to be able to direct and control her own life. I think my microphone went out, okay. And really make sure that that person is being partnered with to co-design, the plan that's gonna direct their services. And really, ultimately, the idea of person-centered planning grounded in the grassroots movement that happened was really about reducing the stigma for the people that we serve in the behavioral health field, and really their capacity and ability to live a comparable life in the community, because on its face, society has kind of said, we don't know if these people are credible, we don't know if they're competent, we can't trust them. And so where people without those diagnoses are able to kind of have that presumed competence and live life in society, the people we serve have that extra stigma to deal with. So a lot of times they don't get the opportunities to make the same choices that we do because people don't believe in them. So really the ultimate goal of that person-centered planning process is to try to kind of level that playing field. So this is the struggle. Yes? Thank you. See, I knew I'd forget. The ENCODE is 16, and 16 is how old my child is and taking their driving test this week, so wish me luck. Okay, thank you. So in both behavioral health and the healthcare field, we have the universal goals of health and well-being, right? We want everybody to be able to be healthy and live the best lives possible and really maintain that stable functioning. But in the healthcare world, we're really looking at, those services, those diagnosis and whatever the treatment is, and that's prioritized. Whereas in behavioral health, we really prioritize the person. And in the healthcare, we're looking at a doctor or somebody to be that expert to kind of tell people what to do. Whereas in behavioral health, we're really looking at that person as the expert of their lives and their experience and looking for their guidance into how to best serve them. So the reasons that it's hard for us to get some evidence-based under person-centered planning is really because of these differences. So like I said, healthcare is based on that diagnosis. There's a kind of a clear procedure. If you have X ailment or illness, there's a prescription for how to treat that, and really are looking for a cure. With our populations, each individual, no matter what their diagnosis is unique, right? So if you meet one person with Down syndrome, you've met one person with Down syndrome. If you meet one person with schizophrenia, you've met one person with schizophrenia, and they all have unique needs and desires and things that will help them with their improvement in life. So we're really looking for that improvement in functioning and to get people as far as they can go. So the healthcare measures is what we still measure even in behavioral health for our success, unfortunately. And the things that are those individual measures based on what that individual's unique needs are more difficult to measure. So this is where the struggle is. You really want to think of medical care as kind of like clothing, right? So the size of the clothing would depend on that diagnosis and what you would want to wear that day, I guess. But to get to that really tailored approach, you need that person-centered approach to be able to tailor it specifically to that person. So I don't know how many of you go to the store, I think especially women, and you want to try on that pair of pants or whatever, and it's the right size, but for some reason it does not fit right. And so that's kind of where that tailoring approach comes in to make sure that we're getting the right treatment that really fits each individual. So, oh, it didn't go. There we go. So in order to really do person-centered planning in the right way, these are kind of the things that need to happen. First, it needs to be really person-driven and not driven by the system. We need to presume that competence, like I had said earlier, because if we're not, then we're kind of shooting ourselves in the foot, right, to begin with. We're really working on co-designing that plan with the person, not for the system to take over, but to really kind of partner with that person to make sure that they are really getting their needs met and whatever the needs are of the system to make sure that we're meeting both at the same time. And then really treating that person as the expert. They're living in their bodies, they are living their lives, they know what's going on, and to respect that and to let that guide the process. The process will also plan and prepare for the future, work on that person's goal development, really their personal dreams and desires, identify their motivations, and really mitigate conflict. If you've got real, true person-centered planning going on, there's inherently going to be conflict because there's different needs from the system, different needs from the person. So you really want to make sure that we're working in a collaborative mode, and we'll get into that more later, and learn from the past. So if there's things that you can review in that planning process and make sure that you're not repeating mistakes, et cetera, and that you're growing from that. Can we find this nice lady a chair, please? There's one up here. Okay. So, this is from, I think the article was called Measuring What Matters. So this is really going over those person-centered principles and the person-centered activities. So really, like we've been talking about, being able to treat the person with dignity, respect, and compassion, working on that personalization, making sure there's coordination between whoever is on this team, and really providing good support is imperative to real person-centered planning. And then the activities that come out of that, which are somewhat similar, is really kind of helping that person be able to do what's called self-managed support. And so that can mean hooking them up with either peer supports or support groups or things in their community, even just relationships, to kind of really help give them the support they need to work through whatever it is they're trying to do to get to their life goals. Shared decision-making is helpful in order to not only for the system to give people the right information and education so that a person understands what it is they're getting into and what should be happening, but that they can make those decisions again about like that co-designing I was talking about earlier. And then really that collaborative care and support planning, which should be available through the entire process, so that the person has whatever support they need to get the goals that they desire. So these are two skill sets. So the shared decision-making skill set is really about what I said, sharing that evidence-based information, making sure that people understand what they're getting into, the risks involved. So if they're maybe trying something new, or they're trying to, life is full of risks, right? So even if somebody wants to, get a job or go to college or whatever, whatever those risks are, being able to inform people of whatever choice they make, the pros and cons, and letting them be able to decide from that information. And then the self-management skill set is really, again, about that support and making sure that a person can build on their capacities and their capabilities, and supporting them for whatever behavior change that they want to. And this is the majority of kind of the encounters that people have in the system with people. This is all going somewhere, I promise. So anything that's person-centered is considered person-centered because it invites support, important community connections are created, and that again is part of that support that we were talking about. Expectations are envisioned, problems are solved, and progress is always celebrated. So now we will get into the nerdy stuff and watch how these scientific theories that support person-centered planning work together and promote real outcomes. So the first theory is called behavior change theory, and a lot of you probably recognize this as part of motivational interviewing. So we do the stages of change, usually with that MI population, but you can see how this all links up through these next couple of slides. So really, when you talk about the pre-contemplation, contemplation, preparation, action, maintenance phases, each of those, the actions that need to happen is about, again, gaining that information and knowledge. You're really getting to know the person, understanding who they are as an individual, and what their needs are. The contemplation phase is really kind of reevaluation of their support needs and making sure that they're kind of ready to start making that decision. They have whatever it takes to get to that place. Then the preparation is really where they're starting to believe in that ability to change. This is supported, again, through those supports that have been put in place, whether, again, that's the person coming up with their own supports, or they've been linked up, again, to like a support group or a peer support. And then in the action and maintenance phase, you're looking for reinforcement and those helpful relationships where people are going to give those natural kind of, attaboy, I see that you've made changes, let's keep it up, and that kind of reinforces the whole process. And this lines up with our, what I'm calling a person-oriented process. So as part of person-centered planning, you have to get to know the person. You have to personalize it. You have to understand really who they are as a person. And then you, again, support the person, or we talked about like providing accommodation. So modifying a person's environment so that they can behave in the way that they would like to. So for example, a person with autism can't deal with the lights, for example, maybe the sound from them. So is there a way to modify an environment to make it so that person is more able to function in a sustained way, so that they can kind of meet this goal of change? Then again, that dignity, respect, and compassion supports them through that belief in their ability to change. And the collaborative care and support that we talked about earlier is really where you're getting that reinforcement and building relationships. And lastly, so the components of actual person-centered planning, a lot of times you hear about including what's important to and for the person, and that comes out of that whole process of getting to know the person, understanding who they are, what is motivating to them, what that personalization means for their actual plan, making those accommodations, like I had said, being able to make it so that that person has the support they need so that they can make those changes, having dignity of risk through that person-centered planning process. So being able to, you're saying you're ready for that change, being able to make accommodations for that person to make that change. So maybe somebody who has, safety issues with knives, they want to learn how to cook, and that prep work has been dangerous in the past. Well, instead of saying, no, we're not going to cook because you can't use a knife, figure out like what are the mitigation that can happen for that risk of using that knife so that they can actually cook and make that change, right? So that's kind of what dignity of risk is about. And then lastly, we are increasing people's independence, productivity, and community engagement through that collaborative care and support where we're in that kind of action phase. So pulling it from the very beginning to all the way to person-centered planning, you can see how we've kind of gone from all that, the stages of change and all the work that goes into that to the pieces and parts of the person-centered planning process. Because change is really dependent on desirability or motivation. So if the person wants more autonomy, more time, respect, security, maybe health, maybe more predictability in their lives, you're using that to drive whatever that person-centered planning process is, making sure that that plan matches whatever their motivations are so that whatever is in that plan can actually successfully be achieved. And all of that will set the person up for action and help the person shift their perceptions, which in turn helps change that behavior. Oh, I didn't advance the slide. I'm sorry. There you go. Now you can see it. All right. So now we're on to goal development theory, which hopefully is pretty obvious why it relates to person-centered planning. So no matter what stage of change a person is in, they will still have goals, and the goals must be driven by that person. This is the best way to ensure that those goals will be written to reflect what the person actually has control over. A lot of times, if a plan's not person-centered, you'll see goals and objectives that really the person doesn't have any control over. If somebody lives in a group home, let's say, and they have a goal to live in their home, well, unless somebody's about to evict them, they probably don't really have any control over that. So, think about how that affects people's ability to actually achieve their goals. If it's something they don't have any control over, then the likelihood that there's going to be a good outcome is not going to work. So when the objectives and goals are service-centered, they come from somebody else's motivations. So if it's coming from somebody else's motivation, then the person really has no ownership in that goal, and it's less likely that they're going to achieve the goal. So a goal or an objective might say something like, Sarah will stop being angry as evidenced by 0 instances of screaming. Well, everybody gets angry, and it's okay to get angry. It's just the dysfunctional behavior we're trying to change, right? So maybe the objective that would be more person-centered would be, Sarah might want to breathe deeply 3 times and then count to 10 before interacting with whatever her trigger is, I don't know, talking to her mother or whatever. That's something she would have control over, right? So in goal development theory, the things that are important to that goal development are really about choice and attention, effort and persistence, goal-directed action, and again, that support that the person receives, having something relevant that is going to be about what that person's ultimate vision is for their life, getting regular feedback on their progress, making sure that the person is actually committed to whatever they're working on, and that they actually know how to achieve those goals. And so you'll see in person-centered planning, that choice and intention, and effort, it's coming from the person. So if they're choosing what the goals are, then that's, the person-centered part. A support team is chosen by that individual for people that hopefully are kind of on their team and want to see them succeed, which facilitates that goal achievement. Goals and objectives must be relevant to that person's vision, and should be, because they're coming up with them. We have regular periodic reviews, which gives people feedback about how they're doing, and they can make changes if needed. And the goal really belongs to the person and is based on, in their own strengths, ability, and preferences. And really the breakdown of the objectives and methods of how the goal is achieved is evident in the person-centered planning process, and the person is going to have that continued support throughout the process to make sure that they're able to achieve those goals. So really the parts of that person-centered planning process are reflected in the goal development theory. So just shortly, we'll talk about the pictorial superiority effect, which is a mouthful. But I really liked this because basically this pictorial superiority effect says that when you can see something, when you can envision it, it makes it more likely to be able to achieve a goal. So interestingly enough, those of you who've been around know that there are, I don't know, 1 million, I think, different person-centered planning tools that can be used that are all really based on this principle of people really being able to see and envision what's happening in that person-centered planning process. So really, it's been scientifically studied that if people are able to really visualize and kind of see themselves when they've met their goal, they have a better time being able to actually achieve that goal. So built into that person-centered planning process is a lot of those tools, whether you're doing a path like in here, or maps, or one of the life course tools. Those are all kind of based in a visual model. And it could be as simple as somebody just being able to close their eyes and imagine it, but using a dream board or whatever works to really give that person a visual cue to what it's going to be when they achieve their goals is much more effective than just being able to write something down on a piece of paper and hope that it happens. So now we get into self-determination. And self-determination, again, is really the actor power of making one's own decisions and determining one's own, in this case, political status, or the state of being free from the power and control of another. So person-centered planning needs to be personalized. The behavior change and goal development involves that choice, motivation, and commitment, owning one's own goals and supports. That means that to support one's decisions, to give them real agency, right? To inform and educate them, to allow that risk, which means those supports are kind of letting go of trying to control the person, right? That's self-determination. Person-centered planning and self-determination go hand in hand. The philosophy of self-determination as a human right is imperative, but even more direct is self-determination theory. So there's 3 mini theories underneath self-determination theory that also reflect person-centered planning. So the first one is called the basic psychological needs theory. And this theory is that as long as people feel autonomous, competent, and related to others, they are psychologically healthy and their behavior is intrinsically motivated. And behavior that's intrinsically motivated, we'll go over a little bit in a minute, it's more long-lasting and more effective than, if you just think about anybody who just tells you what to do or is either rewarding you or punishing you for doing something, it probably lasts as long as the reward or punishment does, but doesn't really stay around, whereas intrinsic motivation stays longer. So Ryan and Dietschy are the fathers of self-determination theory, and really this theory talks about autonomy, competence, and relatedness. So autonomy is really, that ability to have that control that we talked about with self-determination. Competence, am I on the wrong slide? No, I'm on the right side. Thank you. Competence is really talking about just the person's ability to know that they do something well. And relatedness is really about knowing that you have people that are important to you and that you're important to other people. So if you have these things, it increases not only your well-being, but your motivation and that intrinsic motivation as well. So interestingly enough, autonomy is also independence, which is part of our Medicaid manual in medical necessity for person-centered planning. And productivity, knowing that you do something well. And community inclusion is about relatedness. So these tenets of psychological well-being are already built into our service system, luckily through that person-centered planning process. Oh, I think I went too far. There we go. So now we get into autonomous or intrinsic motivation. So the keys to this is that that motivation, it needs to be something that's personally valued by the person. So something that really gets them out of bed in the morning, something that they really desire or feel is important to them, perform voluntarily. So, not, again, if you're having somebody else kind of controlling whatever you're doing, obviously that's not intrinsic motivation. And then, they're engaged in whatever this behavior is for the sake of itself, right? So when you have intrinsic motivation, you get persistent behavior, health, and well-being. And so that's kind of what we always talk about, right? Is health and safety, making sure that people are functioning well, and those are kind of the outcomes that we want from real person-centered planning. So we're in our maintenance phase, right? Stable functioning. And lastly, I guess we're finishing up motivation. So in both adult learning theory and self-determination theory, that self-control and self-initiated learning is the most lasting and pervasive. And really, this is kind of the core of human motivation. You have to have behavior to live, right? Every living organism is goal-directed. There's something, even if it's an internal process, right, that has to happen for them to stay alive. Otherwise, they won't survive. If a predator is coming after you and you decide not to do anything, you're probably not going to make it very far, right? So, these are the things that really propel human society forward, right? We invented the wheel. There's people that try to outdo their neighbors with Christmas lights displays for whatever reason, that drives them. It really has that idea of one-upmanship has really driven technology in our society forward. So this motivation really is what drives not only humans, but person-centered planning. Did you have a question, Sarah?
Do children have PGPs?
Yeah, it's called Family-Driven Youth-Guided Planning for Children. But yes, they do. It's the same principle. The only difference is that the family is brought in, and so they really help kind of make those decisions a lot of times for the youth. But as they get closer to being an adult, it should kind of switch to where that youth is making more of those decisions so they can prepare to be an adult. Yeah. Thank you for your question. No, you're fine.
So related
Good question. And I think that's part of the challenge of the behavioral health system. But everybody, no matter what their disability is, has behavior, like we said. So, looking for the ways that that person can communicate, whether that's just an eye gaze, whether that's, maybe a certain behavior just showing like pleasure or dissatisfaction. And those are the people that you really want to make sure that you're building a good support circle for, making sure that the people that know that person best are there during that person-centered planning process so that they can be supported to, as much as possible, make those decisions on their own. But, part of that process could even be writing a plan just to help the people around them. Maybe there aren't people that, parents or somebody from the family that actually really, really knows them well. And maybe you are really relying on staff that don't know the person. So that process might be for that year to really kind of look for what can we find out from this person? What are their behaviors that are communicating something to us? And so a lot of those person-centered planning processes might involve a lot more pictures or whatever kinds of means of communication. And there are a lot of independent facilitators around the state that can help support those people if there's, not a lot of relationships with that person that can kind of help with figuring out what it is that kind of motivates that person. And the other thing that you should always take into consideration is just kind of basic human needs with somebody. So, if you've got a person who is they're maybe wheelchair bound, they don't speak typically, they really don't have a lot that they can do, looking at their quality of life and kind of putting yourself in their shoes, like what would you want to be doing? I mean, even something as simple as some people have like really bland, soft diets and even thinking about like, well, wouldn't it be nice to just throw something crunchy in there if possible? Or, just basic things. Can we take this person gardening? Can they go out in the community? How do we get them to meet other people in the neighborhood? How can that person help somebody else? Is there anything that they can do to contribute to other people and not just always have people helping them? So those are kind of some of the things that you would want to look at through that person-centered planning process.
Can I add something to that?
Sure.
I think that having been doing person-centered planning for the last 30 years, that we often do a disservice to people by assuming that they can't communicate their wants and needs, that we bring in people who truly understand them, but we also bring in peers who might understand their own perspective. And the more people you have in the room, the clearer their communication is going to become. So opening that circle as opposed to closing it is really going to make a huge difference moving forward. And I'm just going to give a shameless plug for the presentation that Jen and I are doing this afternoon, which will kind of dive into some of that stuff around. It's not about the process, it's about the people that we bring in to person-centered planning to really make it work.
Absolutely. Thank you. Go ahead.
Especially for persons being served at a residential home, residents, that's kind of hard. But I think that the system ought to encourage independent facilitators to meet with them prior to their plan meetings, because in a lot of cases, it's only the person that lives there and maybe their case manager. And a lot of times they want to get through that paperwork and move on. And I think the independent facilitator would be very important. And another question I have is, are court-appointed guardians required to be at a PCP meeting? If you're a resident in a home, you have a court-appointed guardian, shouldn't the guardian be required to be there to understand that person's plan for the year?
Should.
They're employed by the local government, they could be required, you could be required to visit.
Yeah, they have to be invited, they don't have to be there.
Yes.
You have to go over the treatment plan and sign it.
Yep.
For it to, if you're not like to, for it to pass through behavioral
Yes. I would love to say, yes, they have to, but we do have guardians that are like in other states and, which doesn't really make a lot of sense to me, but so getting to a plan might be, just not out of the question for whatever reason. But I think that, as part of, obviously that person makes some pretty substantial decisions for that individual. So not having them at that process. And honestly, if you can get that court-appointed guardian, sometimes and you have a really good person-centered planning meeting and process going on, they learn a lot from, really engaging in true person-centered planning. And so a lot of times have their eyes really open to the possibilities for hopefully not only that individual, but maybe the other individuals that they're serving. So
And I guess to challenge that, remote participation is something we all deal with now since COVID's murder.
that's very true.
Really, I know that some guardians have a lot of charges and, they're spread thin, but I can't believe there isn't a way for them to participate even if it's remote.
Yeah. Sarah? Mm-hmm.
So how did a PCP help people move away from guardianship?
Ooh, that might be a whole nother session. I think that person-centered planning could be like that first step to really identify that that's where that person wants to go and figuring out what the goals are and planning out that process of how that could happen. I think that's a great way to, build those supports and the team that's going to help you, show that judge that that's something that isn't needed anymore, that you can use real shared decision-making and all of the other things that are there that people have access to just like everybody else, so. Okay. All right. Okay, so the last mini theory in the self-determination theory is just goal content theory. So it's really just talking about that the content of the actual goal, its meaningfulness and I'm going to say heartfeltness to that person, like how much the person values whatever that goal is really going to be important to actually achieving that goal. So the goal is really focusing on the what, and the motivation is focusing on the why. So you need both of them to really make sure that this goal is going to be achieved. If you have somebody working on a goal and they're not really making any progress, it's just not working out, then the motivation is probably wrong. You're probably not going in the right direction. So that's why person-centered planning has to include both that what and the why. So you have the goals and objectives, and you should have that motivation too. And that's why we talk about making sure that those goals and objectives are strengths-based, that we include what's important to and for the person, that their preferences are there. And preferences are more than just like, I choose, this occupational therapist. But really talking about, as far as whatever services and supports the person is going to get. Like, I prefer that I meet with my boyfriend on Wednesdays because that's the best time for me that I have time to see him, or I prefer to have cream in my coffee, like, things like that are everyday decisions that, depending on whatever service or support that you have in your plan, people should know those things about how to best support you and your personalized needs. And really that vision for the person's life, a kind of a long-term overall, whether it's I want to get a job as a, waitress, or I want to go to college, or whatever that thing is that they really want to achieve in their life. And maybe that isn't going to happen this year with this person-centered planning process, but that you can see the overall vision and kind of all the steps that they're going to take to get there. And overall, like we had talked about with our independence, productivity, and community engagement, we're promoting self-determination. So really, all of our services are not really about controlling other people, but really positioning those people to control themselves. And honestly, it's a weird, backwards kind of situation, because the more control you give to other people, you kind of actually have more control over a situation yourself. So, for example, if you've got somebody that's kind of getting into a crisis, but you kind of are with them and saying, like, what is it you need, what's going on, you know, and you're like, do you need food, you know, if people get hangry, and you're able to kind of fix that situation for a person, they're gonna open up to you more and be able to let you in more and give you a little bit more leeway. Whereas if you're just trying to tell them what to do and where to go all the time, you're just setting yourself up for conflict, right? So people need to find their own best way and really have support to be able to do that. So now we're getting into conflict resolution, or dare I say, conflict prevention. So as you know, in behavioral health, we're really looking at increasing a person's functioning and really trying to keep people kind of in that stable area, right? So if we have people with some behavioral needs, right, there's kind of this crisis cycle that we go through. And in order for us to get any progress, right, people really need to be in that stable functioning area to really work on any goals or any kind of interventions that we're going to do, right? So we don't want to necessarily avoid conflict, but we want to kind of try to prevent going all the way to this crisis mode, right? Because people can't learn and they can't grow when they're in crisis mode. And so a lot of people we treat, this is something we gotta watch out for. We gotta keep people kind of in that this prevention mode right here. So kind of staying in the green, preventing an escalation before it occurs. And so that's kind of the goal of the whole time the person is receiving services. And this is where we kind of get into conflict resolution. So conflict is a constant, it's a constant piece of interacting with other people. Everybody has different interests, and sometimes those interests conflict. So person-centered planning is really trying to channel that conflict in a creative way and really trying to help with that person's growth. So there are 3 approaches to conflict resolution. One is called power-based, one's rights-based, and one's interest-based. So power is really like that kind of controlling thing we were talking about, where you're just trying to compel the other party to just give in and do whatever you're trying to get them to do. It's a very win-lose battle. Really, the resolution is on the differences between the parties. The rights-based is really kind of like that determining who's right. It's usually based in kind of a moral or a legal standard, right? So you're fighting maybe in court, unfortunately. But, you know, people's what's right and wrong and, you know, maybe in a legal sense even sometimes isn't exactly clear. So sometimes that takes like a third-party adjudication. So you have to get a mediator or a judge or somebody to come in and kind of help with that struggle. And then interest-based is really kind of where we live in person-centered planning. So it's really based on being able to openly talk about, you know, where people's concerns, fears, needs, wishes, desires of the different parties are, and be able to come to a collaborative negotiation to kind of meet in the middle. So either a win-win situation, or it might be something where there's a little bit of sacrifice on both parties that is agreed to be able to resolve that conflict. But we're really moving away from that power-based struggle, which is not where we want to be. So this is the Thomas Kilman conflict mode instrument. It's very exciting. So as you can see, as assertiveness goes up and cooperativeness goes up, we get to the top corner where it says collaborating with the nice people giving each other high fives. We want always in person-centered planning to be in the collaborating or compromising zone. If we're in competing, that's that power-based struggle. If we're avoiding, then nobody's getting anywhere, right? It's kind of that lose-lose model where nobody's taking any action. And we definitely don't want to be in an accommodating mode where somebody is just kind of giving in and doing whatever you want because, like, they just don't have that high assertiveness level. Because those things are kind of in that win-lose zone. So really about being able to compromise and work in a place of trying to give people enough information and understanding, giving them the dignity to understand what the risks and the pros and cons of decisions are, and helping them and supporting them to make decisions on their own, giving them that information, and being really upfront about, kind of those concerns, fears, needs, and wishes for both parties is essential to real person-centered planning to make sure that, again, we're staying kind of in that interest-based zone, which is going to keep people at that stable functioning level and prevent any kind of crisis from emerging. So really, if you have that medical model, right, where, again, some expert is telling you this is what you have to do, we're really like, that's top-heavy power, right? We're just telling people what to do, and the interest level is very small. We're talking about really kind of a distress system as far as, getting people to do, what we want them to do. I don't know how many of you have ever not done what your doctor told them to do, but, it's very common in that system to say, well, I don't know, you need to lose 100 pounds, or you need to take these medicines, or go to physical therapy 6 times a week, and you're like, I have a life and a job. I don't know how that's going to happen. So we really are trying to flip that model. So the person-centered model is really talking about staying in that interest-based model, really helping people to stay in a safe place, to keep people calm, to have them define their own needs, and giving them their ability to make their own choices, helps them put them in control, and they actually feel in control, and they can make better decisions and get to where they need to go. So the person-centered planning process is really kind of broken up into these phases. We're talking about really learning not only about the person, but the person learning about the system itself. Really, again, being able to talk about what's going to happen through that person-centered planning process, what to expect, and learning about each other, understanding who that person is and what's important to them, going through that planning process and having those meetings, with a facilitator or not, being able to have the information that was acquired, drive that process, and support the person to be able to really drive their own person-centered planning process, going through, once that plan is done, whatever those services and supports were in that plan start to be implemented with that person's preferences in mind. And then, making sure that we do that review and feedback on a regular basis to make sure that the person is going in the directions that they want to go, and to be able to make changes if necessary. So those are all, again, reflective of, that behavior change model, the goal development model, but it's also reflective of what we call the plan, do, study, act cycle. So this is a method of continuous quality improvement. And the idea is that as you're learning about the person and preparing for whatever meetings are going to happen, et cetera, you're going through that planning phase, you're learning, and these are all, they can be kind of squishy and happening all together at times, but really you're kind of coming up with a plan, implementing it, finding out how it's working, doing that review, and kind of studying what's happening, and then taking an action based on what you learned from that, what they call the PDSA cycle. So really you can use this idea of the plan, do, study, act cycle as a quality improvement process, and they call it an iterative process of improvement. So basically, as you go through that person-centered planning process, you come up with ideas as a team for how the person is going to get to the vision of the good life they want. And basically you try it out, see how it works. And you do your review, you find out it is working, it's not working, we could tweak this thing. Maybe somebody made, I don't know, they're 80% through their objectives and now they need more of a challenge. So you can tweak that and move on to the next thing and then kind of start this process all over again. So really thinking about how you use person-centered planning to continuously review and look at what's happening in a person's life and whatever they need to kind of grow and continue to move towards the life they envisioned is imperative. Oh, I got a clicky. There we go. Oh. So overall, these things are really about, kind of building relationships and becoming really a part of their community. And so in person-centered planning, we bring people together to solve and discuss a plethora of issues. And the scientific theories that support person-centered planning are really born out of real human interaction. So we have the interest level of that conflict resolution that we talked about, keeping people in the know about, what their concerns, fears, needs, and wishes are, for both sides so that, you could work collaboratively with the person. Having that autonomy, the person having autonomy, competence, and encouraging, those relationships. Making sure that the person is driving the process. Making sure that they have the support they need and using those kind of clinical skills to help make sure that that support is there. Using the motivational interviewing to keep people going. Working on that prevention and crisis conflict management. Working on dignity and respect and that dignity of risk for people to make sure that they're really being able to drive their own lives. And using that continuous quality improvement to make sure that people are always moving forward in the way that they want to. That's really what person-centered planning is about. And when it's kept close to the person and the people surrounding them, and they're really upholding the intent and ideas of person-centered planning, that's where the magic happens. It's really, really cool to watch. And it might be part of the reason that there's not a lot of evidence-based information on person-centered planning, because it's hard to do magic and be scientific. I'm sorry, Sarah, what?
What? Could you talk more in the mic?
Oh, I just said when person-centered planning happens, that's where the magic is.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, so that's where you'll find that really cool things happen, and it's fun to watch. So, and that might be part of the reason that we have problems finding out how to make person-centered planning evidence-based, even though there's a lot of scientific theories that back it up. So, I think we have, 8 minutes left. So, does anybody have any questions? Go ahead.
So I find that, I like the self-determination model, I love person-centered planning, but a lot of times what I do find is that the audit tools that the state utilizes, really end up driving sometimes what the care coordinators have to put into individual plans of service, which then look very different when you hand them to a family, because you have this beautiful, if you do a map, or even if you really just have a person-centered planning meeting where people are throwing ideas out, it doesn't always then match very well. And so then you have this, everything in the kitchen sink has to go into the individual plan of service. And sometimes it almost feels like you lose that magic of person-centered planning when you have to make it fit into those other check boxes, you know, to assure that we're utilizing the funding properly and making sure that we are aware of rights and all those other things. And like one of the best examples I kind of have is, I mean, I'm kind of in both worlds, right? So I do self-direction in my home, but I also work for the mental health system and have to assure that we meet those compliance standards. And, you know, I have someone come in who says, well, are you using 28 hours of work a week of your self-direction services in order to support the goals and objectives? Well, no, because 28 hours a week is not necessarily the way my life tends to happen, like maybe a staff called in sick, so now I need to use those in a different time frame, but I also know that you can't use ranges in an individual plan of service, right? And everybody's electronic record looks differently. You know, same thing, like I have families who will call us and say, well, I don't understand why I'm over budget. So they look at their individual plan of service, which has authorizations in it, which are based on units, which are different than an hour. So they see, ooh, I have 1,000 units. That means I have 1,000 hours. No, that means you have to divide that by 4.
Yep.
So I think, I mean, that's the push and pull that I feel at work and that I feel at home is like, how do you make all of that merge together to paint this beautiful picture of someone who really, they want their life to flow.
Yeah. Yeah, and I hear you. I think historically the performance measures that had been developed around person-centered planning were really trying to capture kind of a minimum threshold, and I think the idea was that like it would be easy to capture them. I don't know that that's true necessarily, especially as we've, you know, piled on stuff over the years and new rules have been thrown in, et cetera, et cetera. But I think that what is missing is really like the mental health code talks about that plan being developed through that person-centered planning process. And it's hard to, a lot of times, see the path from, you know, assessment, et cetera, to how that plan was developed. It seems like a lot of times the person gets lost, I think, because of what you're saying, because people are more worried about trying to tick the boxes off than to make sure that that person kind of rings through their plan. Or there's a misconception that that person-centeredness can't be in that plan because of those compliance rules. But really, I think going forward, CMS is looking for, they're looking for more quality in those performance measures. And they're kind of looking to see that there's real outcomes coming out. And so the performance measures are probably going to morph into more of what, you know, is coming from an actual person and their input instead of kind of what's coming out of like this document. So I kind of look forward to, I think one of the examples I heard, which I thought was really interesting, was they were just talking about, you know, we all look for falls, you know, in the group homes anyway. You know, how many people fell how many times in the last month or whatever. And that's one of the measures. But this talked about, instead of just collecting data, the question now is, has someone talked to you about falls in the last month and why it's important for you to avoid falling, which is a completely different measure, right? So I agree with you. I think that there are things that we kind of like went off course with, and sometimes these things don't match up well. But I'd like to think that there's a place that you can get to where you're doing that real person-centered planning process and still able to check off those boxes to you know, make the auditors happy, I guess, for lack of better words. So, and then the whole self-directed thing is like a whole nother topic, but it come to our other sessions and we'll talk about those things, so. Any other questions? Go ahead.
I didn't have a question so much as I just wanted to share it was related to guardianship. There was a new decision out of Wayne County in March where they were a judge denied guardianship in favor of supported decision-making. And now they're hoping to codify that as like a legal alternative to guardianship. And all of those like systems of support can be made in person instead of planning meetings. So it's
Absolutely. Yeah, that would be great. And I think Michigan is one of the worst states for guardianship, unfortunately, so it would be really great to start moving in that direction. So you definitely use those tools in your areas to try and support people. Hopefully for years now you've been talking about some of the alternatives to guardianship so that people don't feel like they're forced into those models, but it's good to have some positive movement towards that. Go ahead.
Is there, what is there a time frame in relation to these more qualitative notations within the plan with CMS?
I don't have an exact time frame. I do know that the department is looking at this as it's not a requirement from CMS right at the moment, but we're kind of looking at it as eventually it will be a requirement. So we're trying to take steps to start pulling those things into our site reviews and looking for ways that we can measure those things in a more person-centered way. Go ahead.
I work with a parent who for the last 2 years has had their person-centered plan rejected and sent back to them to make it more, I guess, agreeable to the contract. But who's there to help make sure that what's in the plan that they really feel is needed can correspond to what can be approved?
So there was some work done a couple of years ago through NCAPS, which I'm not going to remember the acronym. Anybody out there? No. But it's a national collaborative on person-centered practices. And one of the things that was kind of hammered home there is really talking about making sure that when you go through the person-centered planning process and you're having those kind of final meetings, that there needs to be somebody at the table that can kind of give the nod to say, like, yeah, that will work, or no, that won't work. Because it's really not fair to people to, go through what you're saying, like the whole process, think that their plan is good to go, only to have somebody come back and say that's not medically necessary or whatever the issue was.
Because you become time constrained too, because your plan has to be effective by a certain date, and that back and forth can be very tedious.
Yeah, and I guess for now, my answer is really kind of leaning on your support coordinator, whoever is kind of that case holder to really guide you as far as, what can be done in that region. Unfortunately, there's not because each CMH has like their own contracts and their own things that it's not necessarily, it's very standardized across the regions, which is one of my very tiny goals that I'm supposed to fix to, help with consistency across the state. So if you have any ideas, let me know. Go ahead.
I can just say from the standpoint of where I work, one of the things that the case holders and myself work on is we inform customer service, we've explained is not a complaint deferment. It is a way to go and kind of have a Switzerland, looking at everything, having everybody sit down at the table together, but they also can let you know what your rights are. And so there are a lot of times that we've had maybe our utilization management does not agree with our decision. And so we ask the family to come in and we have a meeting, but we extend the old individual service with all those authorizations in order for us to do that so that they can continue to receive the services until some type of either mediation can happen, or we help them go to fair hearing with the state and have the state make that decision for us. And we've done that a number of times, even during COVID, we've had that happen successfully. Sometimes we win, sometimes we don't, but I don't even look at it as a win-lose situation. I just look at it as, listen, we could be wrong.
Absolutely.
And if we're wrong, I would rather be told I'm wrong and fix it so that it doesn't continue to happen. But I can just say that's how we've been handling it at our agency.
Did you hear that over there? Okay, go ahead.
I think from a caseholder perspective, I think we need to do a little bit more work with helping to empower them, to feel more confident to have these conversations. Because, to sit with an individual and their supports and talk about the most cost-effective way to make sure that this is taken care of is not always a paid service.
Right.
And helping people to understand that,
Mm-hmm.
and that we have to explore those things.
Yep.
And that we have to look at outside of the system sometimes, and you're on the have waiver, and now we need to have 3 quotes to be able to do this and consider this, and, and now we have the 1915I, and, I think that if there's anything, Laura, that can be done from a consistency perspective is, creating some type of real meaningful training.
Mm-hmm.
Because I think what happens a lot of times is concept is great, practice is difficult.
Absolutely.
From a caseholder perspective, and, and if you're able to make it work with this one individual, then everybody comes after them. Well, you let that happen, or something
Yeah.
like that. I feel really, as a previous caseholder, I feel their struggle because I have lots of conversations with them and trying to figure out how to help them feel okay and be okay with having some hard conversations sometimes. And that's that conflict piece, right?
Yep.
How to help them kind of have the conversation, navigate through that with the person-centered planning process. Because we all have things that we want, but don't necessarily need as defined by Medicaid.
Right.
Right?
Yep.
And how to have a conversation in a meaningful way about that, to make sure that we're not losing sight of it, right? We still need to deal with this, and we still need to kind of find a solution to this.
Yep.
But it may just not be this, right? I feel like if we could figure out a way to do that, I think it would give those caseholders some skills, some tools to be able to be more effective in developing plans for person-centered.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for bringing this up too, because I think, we talk about support a lot, and really, the community mental health system, right, is called community mental health system for a reason. And so we are supposed to be really leaning on our community. Person-centered planning if it's happening on a large scale in a community, really should be bringing that community in and changing that community for hopefully the better. And, being able to use those resources that are already available in that community is absolutely, it honestly is a necessity if you're talking about Medicaid funds. And so, when people are talking about those supports, it really should be kind of a universal, right? You're looking at everything, and really, I think Sheldon had said, bringing all those people in, right? Because the more people you have at the table, the more people know about they are more likely to know about everything than, just having one person there talking with the person. So that people have ideas and links to other things that, you know, maybe the actual system would never be able to discover or be able to link to. So it's a very good point. And really, I think California they talk about it as generic resources. So really making sure that you're always looking at whatever generic resources are first, but not using it because a lot of people will say, well, you have, you know, your mom can do this, your mom can take care of you, you don't need, you know, staff or whatever, but not looking at them to necessarily replace something, but to assume that, you know, that parent is going to do that without actually having somebody agree to it. That's not going to work. So, but to really explore all of that with people and come up with those creative solutions, because that is the ultimate goal, right? Because the more that we connect people with their communities, the more the community can start to support them, and they will not rely as heavily on that community mental health system. So I totally agree. Thank you. Anybody else? Okay. The out code. The moment you've all been waiting for. It's 90, which is probably the age I will retire at this point. Thank you, everyone.